Jets fans, the playoffs may be underway, and while the Manitoba Moose might not be partaking in the AHL playoffs anymore, there is still plenty of thoughts surrounding upcoming prospects and the NHL Draft Lotto, which just concluded, all while the NHL playoffs are still ongoing. The Jets are going to pick 19th overall, which does leave the door for maybe an interesting forward prospect or two, and we'll dive into who those might be on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, friends, and welcome to today's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. As always, thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on your favorite podcasting platforms of choice and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is completely free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode, but most of all, we just really love and appreciate your support. Now, apologies for any interruptions this week as we have any sort of recording delays. I ended up breaking my wrist last week, so my recording schedule this week might be a little bit unusual, but I'm still going to try and get content out to you as per usual on a daily basis. Now, of course, the biggest news right now, aside from the playoffs, is the NHL Draft Lottery. And, of course, bad things, or I guess good things, come to bad teams, which unfortunately for the NHL means that the Chicago Blackhawks have been rewarded first overall, despite all of the off-ice controversies and a lot of this stuff, quite frankly, suggesting that the Hawks really don't deserve this pick. They're going to walk away with Connor Bedard, which is kind of annoying for a lot of reasons, but, that's a conversation for a different time, I suppose. Also of note, Anaheim has won the second pick. Columbus wins third overall. And then from there, you've got San Jose, then Montreal, Arizona, Philadelphia, Washington, Detroit, and St. Louis. Now, you might be wondering, where does that leave the Jets? Because we all know that Winnipeg did actually make the playoffs, and so they are more likely to have a more modest first rounder. Well, they're going to be slotting in at 19th overall. And traditionally, when you're getting into the back half of the first round, your NHL projectability and value does tend to nosedive a bit. That's not to say that, getting into this round, this back of the round means you're not going to get an NHLer at all. In fact, that's far from the truth. But more often than not, right, if you're looking at, a top 10 pick as maybe 20, 30, even 40% chance of making it, if it's like a superstar prospect versus, I don't know, maybe 10 to 20% on the back half of this first round, you can kind of guess where the Jets fall. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but the likelihood that someone is going to really fall to the Jets, I think is, I would say 50-50, right? In the past, the Jets have very much lucked out with who has kind of slipped through the cracks, but usually the Jets are kind of in that top half of the first round, somewhere in picks 13 to 15. 19th overall is going to be a little bit of a trickier challenge. If you go by the athletic rankings, here are some players who might be in that range. Braden Yeager, Zach Benson, which I think a couple of you would be more than a little bit familiar with, as he's played for the Winnipeg Ice. And then, of course, you've got David Edstrom and Oliver Moore. So a lot of interesting players here who more than likely could become NHLers. Benson, for me, might be one of the more interesting ones just because, obviously, Benson has been on local fans' radars for a while. He's a great scorer, a little bit on the smaller side, but has endless compete, constant net drive, very creative player. And some people have, apparently compared him to Jonathan Marchessault or something, which, if that is his NHL projection and he actually meets that projection, would be pretty darn amazing. I'm not sure what happened to Benson's rankings over the past couple of seasons. He has kind of slipped a bit over, I would say, the last year or so. He used to be a lot higher ranked, in the first half of this round. But as he has kind of dropped a little bit, say the Jets were to get him. I think if you get him at 19th overall, you'd be thrilled. A guy who might be maybe like a middle six winger with some significant upside if he really does hit, I think would be fantastic value. If the Jets were to get Oliver Moore, Moore has kind of been, I would say, a capable U.S. national dev team player, a guy who does have excellent skating. Somebody has compared him to Jean-Gabriel Pageau, according to The Athletic. So if that is actually accurate, I haven't had a chance to watch him, but should that be accurate, Pageau would be a great middle six addition. Um, a future version of him, right? I guess the question for the Jets, though, is it really sensible just to hold on to this pick or maybe trade back? And I guess that really depends on how the Jets view this year's draft class, because after you get out of the top 10 this year, I feel like it's kind of a toss up. Once you get past the first obvious picks, there's just a lot of chaos, a lot of variance. And when it comes to that, I feel like the Jets generally do a pretty good job of getting value out of later rounds. So if you want to take more home run swings, might be better to drop the 19th overall pick unless there's a prospect that you can't miss. If someone like Cole Perfetti were to drop it, 19th overall, of course, I would say take it, use that pick all day, no question. But this year, I don't know if there's going to be a slam dunk faller like that somehow reaches all the way to 19th. Brad Lambert, I think, was a very fortunate situation with the Jets falling to 30th overall or so. I don't foresee that being the case here, barring a really big surprise. I don't know if anyone could even be seen as falling that far, just because the rankings are kind of all over the place once you get out of those first 5 to 10 prospects. So for the Jets, this might not be a bad year to trade back if you're trying to restock the cupboards, because let's be real, right? Winnipeg's prospect cupboards are a little bit, I wouldn't say barren, but I do think that they could use some more depth, and that is something where the Jets, organizationally speaking, are certainly in need, especially as we're talking about the Jets potentially in the next year or so looking more at a rebuild and a retooling, right? You need to, start going for futures and essentially cutting back on wages by drafting more players, developing internally, and starting the process of really overhauling your prospect pool. And I think this would be a decent chance to do so. Not that I'm really familiar with this class deeply. I will have to do some research over the next few weeks and kind of dive into it. The Jets being generally in the mix for the playoffs has usually meant that I don't always look at the prospect rankings. I usually just trust the Jet scouts to pull up some really good talents. I think McGroarty and Lambert are great examples of that. But this year, I have no idea who the Jets would even be interested in. So stay tuned as we dive more into that. But of course, in the meantime, lots of playoffs ongoing. Want to dive into some of the current series and some of the interesting thoughts that we've had watching some of these games coming up in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at Indeed. There is no I in team, but there is one in Indeed, and that's the hiring platform you need to build yours. When you're hiring, you need Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. They streamline hiring with powerful tools that help you find match candidates meeting every single need for your profile. With Instant Match, over 80% of employers get quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job, based on Indeed's data. And best of all, candidates that you invite to apply are 3 times more likely to apply to your job than candidates who only see it in the search. And that is a great tool for those of you who are looking for maybe some more targeted options, right? A lot of you are looking for more than just decent candidates. You want somebody who really meets your profile and is actually likely to apply to your job and also accept an offer, right? Join more than 3 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. Start hiring now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/lockedon. Offer good for a limited time. Again, you can claim your $75 credit now at Indeed.com/lockedon. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are taking a quick look now at the NHL Playoffs and some of the interesting series that have happened. Obviously, the second round has kind of been a little more chaotic than even the first round, which is saying something because the first round was pretty darn chaotic, if we're being honest. So far, we've got a couple of good series. Florida versus Toronto has been kind of a one-sided affair, although I think on an individual level, the games have been pretty close. The Panthers have a 3-0 series lead despite Toronto's best efforts, with a chance to complete the sweep. later this week. I believe it is Wednesday. Toronto will be desperately trying to fend off a really embarrassing second round exit after finally winning their first playoff round in, like, what was it, 40 years or something like that? Maybe even longer. It's been a very long time since Toronto has advanced out of the first round, and to lose in the second to the Panthers would probably be a little bit embarrassing, especially in like a 4-game sweep. It's very hard to lose 4 straight games, but Toronto being on the brink after having some issues with, Ilya Samsonov going down in game number 3, Joseph Wall coming in and filling in pretty admirably. It is understandable in some respects, but this Leafs team is super deep and really should be able to at least win 1 game out of the series. If they do exit in 4 games, I suspect that there will be some changes either to the front office or the coaching staff. I just can't imagine that Toronto would be thrilled with yet another premature exit for a team that, quite honestly, now has a very wide open field. If Toronto can't turn this series around, this would be a huge missed opportunity, considering the rest of the playoff field is not that amazing, right? Let's be honest. We're looking at Toronto, Florida, the Dallas Stars, the Seattle Kraken, the Carolina Hurricanes, the New Jersey Devils, the Knights, and the Oilers. And if you tell me that, the Leafs couldn't match up against any of these teams and realistically win a series, it'd be pretty crazy, right? I mean, this is a team that, quite frankly, should be capable of going into one of these and winning, but so far it has not gone that way, and now they face elimination, which, if it does happen, Toronto's probably going to burn down at this point, because I don't think Leafs fans can take another heartbreak. Now, another series that has kind of gone in a rather interesting direction is New Jersey versus Carolina. Carolina basically slapped New Jersey around for the first 2 games and really rung them up to the tune of 6 goals against in each of those games. Even if it wasn't quite 6 games or 6 goals per game, it was 5 goals. And New Jersey kind of was walking away a little bit bloodied, but in game number 3, managed to win 8-4 and kind of claw back a game, which is very similar to how the series against the New York Rangers went. So maybe, just maybe, there's a sign of life. If the Devils were to come back in this series, certainly it does kind of live up to their recent reputation of having a bit of a rough start and then kind of turning it on later in the series and really clawing back in. But I do think, longer term, right, the big question for them is goaltending. Akira Schmid has done a decent job in a couple of games, but certainly doesn't seem to be the kind of guy that you want to entrust a lot of your playoff future to. Who else even is on that roster? I guess Blackwood? I don't even remember who's been in net for this Devils team this year. Vanacek, I know, has had some runs, and he's been okay, but I think if you're really looking for an elite starter, New Jersey might be one of those teams that, should the Jets be trading Connor Hellebuck, they might be the one of the big suitors, because that core's time is kind of now. And they have many of the other pieces to be a championship caliber team, but the goaltending, I guess, is one thing where they could still stand to improve. And they've got plenty of prospects to offer a team like Winnipeg, certainly a couple of futures that would be really good options, maybe even some top-end prospects like Nemitz, although I can't imagine that they would really want to trade him, but should they? That could be an option for the Jets, and suddenly you'd get a really interesting blue liner for Winnipeg's future. And the Devils kind of really build on that core that is kind of built to win now, especially in scenarios like this where, they find themselves in a very early series hole in, again, a field that is pretty wide open. I think for the Devils, they'd feel a little bit disappointed if they don't turn this one around and eventually rally back against the Canes. Carolina's a good team, but they're suffering a lot of injuries. And again, if ever there was a year to try and make a run of it with as many top-end playoff contenders falling out early in the first round, this is probably your best chance at doing some real damage and maybe even making it all the way to a Stanley Cup final, which just sort of reiterates why it's so disappointing that the Jets flamed out so massively against the Vegas Golden Knights. But, no point in dwelling on that. It is what it is. We've all been there and done that before. Best to just move on and hope that we don't think about it too deeply going forward. Now, speaking of some other playoff series, including the Knights, we'll dive into how those other series on the Western side are faring, as a couple of teams might be on the verge of some very surprising results and upsets here in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at Built. Those of you who know me and have listened to this podcast for a long time know that I'm personally a very big fan of Built Bars. No idea what I'm talking about? Well, it's the only protein bar that tastes more like a candy bar, with a 100% real chocolate exterior and a soft, chewy interior. They come in delicious flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, cookies and cream, and so much more. But you might be wondering, well, as good as they taste, how good are they for you? Good question. Well, most Built Bars clock in at around 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and a whopping 17 grams of protein, which means low calorie, low carb, but super loaded in great protein for you to help build strong muscles. And a lot of you who are fitness enthusiasts and like to go to the gym, this is probably an ideal balance and music to your ears, especially a lot of you who have protein bars that are frankly loaded with sugar and kind of give you a bit of a crash after you ingest one. So if you're ready to give Built a try, you can check them out at Walmart or Sam's Club. They have a couple of preset variety boxes with some of their most popular flavors. I personally recommend just going to built.com so you can customize your own variety box and check out a great selection of even more top flavors from Built. I promise you, if you try a Built bar, you won't go back. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets. Thank you for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. Everydayers can tune in later this week as we will start our prospect coverage. I think the biggest question I have heading into this offseason for the Jets is, who should Winnipeg even be targeting, and how many picks do the Jets even have? Because Winnipeg this year obviously has traded away a couple of picks. Might be a good time for Winnipeg to try and extract some value out of deeper rounds, but Lord knows it's going to be tough with the draft rankings and stuff being kind of all over the place. But in the meantime, NHL Playoffs still ongoing. And in the Western Conference, we have Dallas versus Seattle in what has been a very high-scoring series, and so far Seattle has managed to prevail 2-1. Seattle just won yesterday, it was yesterday, defeating the Dallas Stars 7-2 in a massive, massive performance. The first period was like nothing, and then all of a sudden, Seattle just opened the floodgates, and it was like 4-0 within the first 10 minutes of the second period. A huge performance for the Kraken, and I think the Kraken have really opened eyes for folks as a team that legit seems like a real Stanley Cup contender. I mean, the Stars team came into the postseason looking venomous, looking like a really strong team, and the Kraken have, quite frankly, undressed them on numerous occasions. The Seattle team kind of reminds me a little bit of Vegas in the first season when they made their way all the way to the Cup. If the Kraken do have that Cinderella run in them, I think that'd be super cool. It does seem like we're fated to head into a clash of expansion franchises, which would be pretty awesome, right? If you're looking for like narratives and storylines and teams that have some interesting roster compositions that are kind of aligned, along with some recent history that is somewhat similar. I mean, the Kraken versus the Knights couldn't really be any better scripted. Speaking of the Knights, you've got Vegas currently leading Edmonton 2-1. And, the Oilers, one of those teams that I think a lot of people, myself included, really thought would have a better postseason run, but the goaltending for them has been a little bit meek. And so far, Vegas is winning all the battles at even strength, which is kind of a problem for the Oilers. Edmonton can certainly win on special teams, but if it's at 5v5, this Knights team has the ability to really carve you up like we saw with the Jets. And if Vegas is kind of rolling at 5v5 and essentially owning the series, Edmonton's going to be in real trouble. I think the Oilers are one of those teams that's probably looking at Connor Hellebuck this offseason as a real option because it seems like Skinner's not really ready in net. And there's just not many goaltending options that I think are really going to do the job for a team that, quite frankly, is kind of wasting some of the prime years of Draisaitl, McDavid, Nugent-Hopkins, Yamamoto, all of these top-end young players. And the Oilers just don't have a lot of room for error, right? This team made some really big acquisitions this offseason and certainly at the trade deadline. And I think, Ekholm's been a great fit for this team. And certainly they are playing better hockey. But if they get eliminated in the second round, I think it's going to be a really long offseason for Ken Holland as the bill comes due for a lot of very bad decisions. So we'll see if the Oilers can turn it around against this Knights team. Vegas has been here plenty of times before. Would not be shocked if they end up in the Western Conference Finals again. They kind of go as, they always do. This Knights team is just consistently good. Unfortunately for us, we always see them, and certainly it's been a painful reminder whenever the Jets have faced them in the postseason. Not too often that it happens, but, 17-18, and now this past playoff run ended very similarly. Vegas kind of whooping us, and so if they go on and certainly make a push for the Cup Finals, would anyone be shocked? Probably not. But certainly we'll all be lamenting that, as we always seem to be on the losing end of teams that go on to end up in a Cup Final. But let me know your thoughts on who you think is going to prevail in these series. Give me your Stanley Cup Finals predictions in the comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. Everydayers can drop in tomorrow for some more prospect talk and initial thoughts on how the Jets can approach this draft and what they should do with some of the players that are currently on the roster, maybe swapping for some more futures, maybe trading back as well if they think that there's nothing good in the first couple of rounds. We'll dive into all of that on tomorrow's episode, but for tonight's show, again, that's all the time that we have. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day. We will see you back here tomorrow, and as always, go Jets go.